Okay, so we'll cover data binding today, and so data binding is one of the main feature in Angular. Okay, so it's like the main purpose of data binding is that whenever some variable or some field got updated in your the component, right? So immediately that value will be updated in the UI or user interface. Okay, so that the syncing model meaning your data. Okay, so model meaning your objects. So syncing between your data and the user interface is basically called data binding. Okay, normally if you go with JavaScript, you have to write some code to update the UI, but in Angular it will happen automatically. So that is basically achieved by the data binding. Okay. So the concept is simple. Let's say if you update any variable or any object um, in your class, that change will be immediately reflected in the UI. Okay, or the other way also UI, and it will be immediately reflected in your class file. So mostly this will happen in case of input fields or like the form fields, right? The select field or radio buttons, checkboxes. So this is basically when you click on some radio button, so that status will be immediately reflected in your text class or the component class. Okay, so this is we call data binding, and there are like a couple of data bindings in Angular. So one is one-way data binding. That means if you update the model, and it will be reflected in your view, or if you update in your view, it will be reflected in your model. So that is called one-way data binding. And two-way data binding is both will happen simultaneously, meaning that let's say you update something in your model, then it will update view, or if you update in view, it will update in your model. Okay, so this is called two-way binding. So this is one way and this is the other way, so it will happen two ways, but one way is either this one or this one. Okay, so depending on your requirement, you can use any of these things, one way or two way. Okay, so but what is the advantage of having this, right? So you don't have to write a lot of code to see the changes between your model and your view. Let's say you call student API and you get some data, that student information, then you don't have to write special logic to render that student data inside your HTML, right? So you can use that interpolation syntax, and basically you bind your the class variables to the template, and Angular will take care of updating the UI. So the data binding is basically only for variables, right? But there is different ways of binding also. For example, property binding. So property binding is you can bind any property of the tag using this syntax. Okay, so this syntax is called the square brackets, right? So in between square brackets, you can mention the property of this tag, and the tag will be updated with this field from the template. The same way, if you want to disable or enable a certain button or text box or any form field, then you can use the same syntax again using the square brackets, and you can provide the disabled property here equals to this can be any property from your component class. Okay, so if it is true in your component class, this button will be disabled. If it is false, then this button will be enabled. So that way you can control enabling and disabling a button. Okay, so this is called property binding. But what is the difference between data binding and property binding, right? So data binding is basically between your template and your TypeScript class. But property binding is basically you're binding to a property of that element, the HTML tags or HTML elements, right? So the other type of binding is called event binding. As we discussed, I think earlier classes, Angular supports, I think all of the events supported by the JavaScript, right? So in order to bind a event into our custom logic or custom method, then we have to use this parenthesis syntax. So you have to enclose that event inside the parenthesis, and you can basically either call a method, or you can basically update a field like some variable to true or false, or some number or something. So basically the whole idea is you can have your event inside the parentheses, and then you, in the right side part, you can call any method from that component, or you can update a field, or you can basically bind anything. So this is called event binding. So events are always represented by this parenthesis in Angular, and properties are represented using the square brackets. Okay, so it supports other syntax also. You can basically use this one also, on hyphen click, if you don't want to use the parenthesis. This will also be supported by Angular, and you can call multiple methods also. You don't have to call single method here, right? So you can call multiple methods also, as many methods as you want. But only thing is you have to basically separate those methods with the semicolon. Okay, and there are many events supported by Angular. I just represented using this click event, but double click or mouse over, mouse enter, mouse leave, drag and drop, or input, key up and key down. There are many events. So basically this one is executed when you type something in the text box. If you start typing any character, then this method will call that many times. If you type 10, let's say if you type John in the text field, so John has 4 characters, right? That 4 times this method will be called. So we'll see that example in hands-on. And okay, let's see examples of these 3, and then we'll go to class binding and attribute binding. Okay. We remove this. Let me remove this also. Okay, I can say button, and button has, see, all these events are supported by Angular. Once I enter the parentheses, it is showing suggestions, right? These are mouse events. These are the video player events. Cut, copy, paste, all these events, double click, and drag related events. All these events are supported by Angular. Now let's use the click one way for now, equal to one second, my mouse is not working. Print hello. Okay, we don't have this method in Angular yet, the component yet. And let me go here and create that event. Okay, we didn't mention the button name. Okay, so if we click here, nothing happen. But if you open F12 and see, go to console. Let me click on this. Hello is getting printed because that print hello method is called whenever we click on this. Okay, and we can do double click event also. Okay, we entered wrong syntax here. So yes, and if I click one time, nothing will happen. I have to click 2 times. Then only it will call that method. Okay, and let's try the key up event or input event. Name equal to username, and then let me use the input event, print character. This one will take the event. Let me add this in here. I take the event and let me call the console.log and let me print the event. So whenever I type something here, so every character it is calling the method and it is printing the whole event passed by the Angular framework. So the input event type is input event, and it is taking some other parameters also, is trusted, is composing, all these things. When user entered the data, I entered data, right? So for yes, this event being generated, the first event, the data section we can see yes, and for A, the second event, and for Y, the third event. So 3 events were generated. And if I try to remove also, for each remove, it will generate 1 event, but data will be null in case of if it's a remove, okay, or delete. If I remove A, it will print again, and it will print data as null. And it will, I remove yes also, same thing happened. So this way, if you type as many characters as you want, right? So basically it will, for each single character entry here, will trigger that event. So this is how it will happen in case of the event binding. But let's see the data binding. Okay, let me remove this. Let me remove this. Okay, let me add some paragraph tag. And hello user, and let me add some variable here. Username string. Okay, let me initialize this username with some value. So I can take this username field and just put it here using the interpolation. Okay, now you go see here, the value is coming, right? So if you see source also, so there is no change actually. Here in the template, we are using the username, the interpolation syntax, but here in the console or the DOM, we are not seeing that syntax anymore. We are seeing the value inside that variable John Doe. So John Doe is getting printed. So this is called one-way binding from our class to component class to the view. Assume that this value is dynamically generated and see what will happen now. Okay. So in order to dynamically update, let's create a button. Let me use that the click event to change the name. Okay, some method I'm calling, and let me create change name. Click here to change name. Let me add this method in app component. So here, whenever this method is called, I want to change the username to John Doy changed. Okay, this is the new value I want to interpolate. Because we binded the component and UI using the interpolation syntax. So if this value is changed in my the Typescript class here, immediately that value will be reflected in the template. Okay, so let's see that. So for now, it is basically the value of the variable is John Doe, and it is printing because it is initialized with that value in the constructor. So now if I click on it, so the value is changed. So now what happened when I clicked on this? When I clicked on this, it called this method change the name, and in the change the name, I'm basically changing the value of this variable to this new value. Because this value is changed here, immediately it will update the UI here. Okay, so this is basically that's how it will keep your component variables or your class variables and your UI sync always. Okay, they must be always same. They cannot be that your component class will have some different data and the template will have different data, right? So it will not happen that way. So both will be always in sync. Okay, so this is basically called data binding. And basically we saw example of two-way data binding because um, so earlier example without this button, it was one-way binding. So whatever I have in my the class was getting updated here. So that is one way. And with this button, what we did is from the UI, we are changing a value of the class variable username and the immediately reflecting here. It's like, two-way. So first we are updating from here UI to the component class, and from component class to again here. So it's like, it's a full circle. So this is basically where it's not a proper example of two-way binding, but this will give you an idea of how the two-way binding will work, right? So how actually the two-way binding will work? So two-way binding will work. We can represent it using the input variable. Okay, so in input variable, assume the name of the input variable is username, and don't confuse this username with this username, or let me change this student name, and value will be empty anyhow. And now we let's create one variable here, student name string. Now let's take this student name variable and go to our template and bind it here. So how can you bind? You can use this syntax and bind the student name. Sorry, ng model equals okay. Now the variable from variable from the class is bound to this input tag. So now if I do something here, immediately this value will be updated. Okay, this is it. Now we are updating here, but nothing is happening, right? So let's do one thing. Let me comment this too. And let me print this value somewhere so that I can see whatever value I'm changing here will be updating this variable from the class here, and from here again we are binding it here in the UI, so that from here to class to the template again, right? So it's like a two-way binding. So two sides it is happening. Now if I type something, it will be immediately reflected in the UI. So now both variables and your UI is in sync. So for every small change I'm doing inside the variable, inside the input box, is getting updated your the student name variable from the component, and from there immediately it is getting reflected here. Okay. So this is called two-way binding, but this one is called one-way binding. Okay. So any questions so far with the examples?
No, sir. It's all clear now.
Okay. So we already saw the event binding also. Now let's go to the class binding. So the
Okay.
class binding is basically, let's say you have CSS classes and you want to add those classes or remove those classes based on some variable changes inside your component class. Okay. So basically it supports that changes or removal or adding using this directive. Okay. So whenever you see this syntax, then it is a directive, and this directive is given by the Angular framework. Okay, so Angular framework gives us the ng class directive, and the syntax of the directive is your HTML element and then this the directive and then some expression. So now what kind of expressions Angular will support using this ng class, right? So one expression is you can mention list of class names using the space, then they will be added to that element. Simple example is I have two classes, one is red and one is size 20, and I'm adding using this ng class directive, and this will be added to the div elements directly, these two classes. Okay. And the second type of syntax is with an array. Okay. This is just a string. Okay. A list of classes with space separated. But you can basically give a list of classes using the array syntax. Okay. So left side is ng class and right side is an array. Okay. Inside array, we have list of classes. You can have any number of classes also, and all those classes will be added to this element. So there is no difference between this one and this one from the outcome point of view, but the input will be different. So here we are giving it as a string, and here we are giving it as a list of an array. And the third syntax is with object. Okay, so basically in JavaScript and TypeScript, if you are using these brackets, then it's an object. It's a JSON object. Now in the JSON object, this is your class name and this is expression. This is your class name, this is expressions, and so on. You can have any number of class names and expressions. Okay, so if this expression evaluates to true, then this class will be added to this element, and if this expression evaluates to true, this will be added to this element. So if these two expressions are true, then these two classes will be added. If these two expressions are false, then nothing will be added to this element. So in which cases this will be useful. Okay, so now let's assume that there is a student list and you're showing some icon or some kind of background color for each student. Okay, If student is passed in distinction, then it will show green color of that row background. And if student is less than 50%, then you will be showing some warning background or like little amber background, because he is not a distinct student. So you want to differentiate between the student, each student, whether he is a distinct fast student or just below 50%, right? So in that cases, we can write an expression that if student percentage crosses 70%, then add this class which shows the background of this element to green or blue, and then if student marks less than 50%, then show orange background or something, or warning background using this class. So it will be added there. So in those situations it will be useful. Okay. And so the one of the example given here is, so this is the class name, and I just hard coded it to true here instead of expression. I just wrote true here. Now in this case, this class will be added to the paragraph element, and same way this bold class, the bold class also will be added because I hard coded true. If I say false here and false here, both will not be added to the paragraph tag. If I say this is true and this is false, then yellow will be added and bold will not be added. So vice versa. So in case of this is false and this is true. So this is how the ng class will be useful, ng class directive. Okay. And same way, if you want to play with the CSS styles instead of the classes, then you can use the ng style attribute. Okay. So ng style attribute also same. Instead of ng class here, you will be using ng style here, and the right side you will be using the object syntax. Okay. So object syntax is like always this open and close flower brackets, and then your style name here and the style expression or style property value. So the simple example is here. I want to add font size of this h1 tag to be some 20 pixel. Okay, what I have to do? I have to use the ng styles left side equals to, I have to use an object syntax to open and close the object, and inside that I can have this key value pairs. So this is a pair, right? So this is a key, font size, and value is 20 pixel, and this one will be added to h1 as a style, the CSS style. And in cases sometimes you want to you want to add the units into your style, you can basically use this syntax. Okay, you can use style name dot unit, meaning a pixel or em or rem, like points, pt. So you can use any kind of units here, and right side will be your number. So instead of 20 pixel here, you can say just 20 here, and font size dot px. Okay. So example given here is, I'm using width property, and the width property must be always in pixels. So that's the reason I can say width dot pixels, and I can just give number here right side. So when this added, this element, the width is added to this sum element, then that time it will basically change it to width colon 10 pixels, because we give units as px here. Okay. And there is some other syntax also. The property name equals not equals the semicolon, sorry, colon. You have some expression here. This is called ternary expression. So the value of this is, if this condition is true, if that this condition is true, and the value after the question mark will be returned. If this condition is false, then value after this colon will be returned. Okay. In this case, what will happen? This condition is true. That time what will happen? Background color colon red. It will become red. If this condition is false, then what will happen? Background color colon blue. Because condition is false, will return the second value. Condition is true, it will return the first value after question mark. Okay. So let's see attribute binding and then we'll see some example of class and style binding hands-on. So attribute binding is a little different compared to our class and style binding, right? So basically there will be this prefix, attr prefix will be added, dot, and you can have any attribute of that element. Okay, so in order to basically change area label property of my button, then what syntax I have to use? I have to use the same property binding syntax. Then attr dot, this area label is basically part of the button element. So that's the reason I'm using this attribute. So attribute dot attr dot area label equals to this some variable. Okay, this can be part of your component class, or if you want to hard code here, you can hard code, or it's up to you. But basically we have this provision to use these variables from our component class. Okay, and there are some few other types of attribute binding also, like call span, or again you can use attr dot the target name is the call span here. So basically it will add call span property. Basically to change the call span property, basically you can use this syntax. Okay, so now let's go here and use these couple of examples to see how ng class and ng style will work. So let me remove this. Okay, and let me say let me use paragraph tag and see how I have classes or not. Okay, I have many classes. Let me remove these. I commented those. Now I have orange class, yellow class, and bold class. Okay, now I want to add those classes to my paragraph tag. So what is the syntax? Ng class, here it is, equals I can say let me add some text. Ng class demonstration example, or like ng class directive demonstration. Now here what I can do, I can add orange and bold. Okay, but it is giving some error. Why it is giving error? So whenever you put this syntax, then that variables will be considered, or that values will be considered as variables inside your TypeScript class. It is expecting those two orange and bold to be some variables inside your class, but we don't have such variables. So these are CSS classes, right? So these are text or like string we have to give here. So in that case, we have to make that as a string. So in that case, we put single colon and single colon here, so that now the color also changed, right? So now it is a hard-coded string here. Okay, if you don't want to put hard-coded string here, then what you can do is you can remove this single quotes and create some variable, say classes, and put classes here, classes equals orange bold. Okay, so instead of hard coding, we can create a variable and we can assign those values to this string variable, and here we can hard code it. We can give the variable name. Now if we go here and see, now the two classes will be added to the element. So here also you can see we did not add class. Okay, we did not add class attribute, and we did not add these two. So we added the ng class. So ng class equals to this variable, and this variable in turn contains these two classes separated with space. Now these two classes added by the Angular framework here, right? That's the reason the color and background, the color of the font and the boldness of the font is changed, right? So now let me go here and let me use that earlier syntax with single colons. Okay. So now also there is no difference. Okay. Now I want to use the array syntax. This is a string syntax, right? So the array syntax I can use, I can open bracket, I can put this, basically this is string array, right? Comma, second element is this one, and let me close the array. Okay. And there are no single quotes here before the array, because array is an object, right? You don't have to mention that. And let me go back and see the same output, right? Now, if you see here in the element section here, we can see the orange and bold added, just like with the previous example. Now, let me come here and let me change it to the object syntax. Okay. So the first one is using this syntax, and second one with array, and third one with the object. Let me change it to object. Okay. Now it is class name, and I must have some expression here. Let me say true for now. And second one is again comma, class name and some expression. Let me say true. And this one is closing my object. Now let me save it. I can see this is string one, this is array one, this is the object one. There is no difference. Here also two classes added, here also two classes, and here also two classes. Now let me change the expression here. So now let me change the expression to false. Okay. So now orange will not be added, but bold will be added because here we have true. So now the output is content become bold, the text become bold, but the orange is not added here. So here also you can see for the first two cases, orange bold is added, but the third case, orange is not added, only bold is added. Okay. If I say this also false, then both will not be added to my paragraph tag. So I can see there is no class attribute added here, and I can see plain text and default color black. Okay. If I say this is false and orange to true, then color will become orange, and font is normal font. It's not bold because only class orange is added to my paragraph tag. Okay. These are the three ways you can apply the ng class attribute or the ng class directive, and change the classes based on some dynamic field changes. Okay. And this cannot be, I just hard coded here, but it can be any expression 10 greater than 3, or let's say age greater than 30. So I can see age greater than 30, and I have to create this variable inside here, age equals to 20. Okay. So now the error gone away. So this is an expression. You can see here, orange is added. Okay. Because orange is 10 greater than 3, this is true because orange is added, but age I entered as 20 in the component. So 20 is basically cannot be greater than 30. So this condition is false. That's the reason bold is not added to this element. Okay. So it's up to you and your imagination what you can do with this syntax. Okay. And let's go to the second one, attribute binding. And attribute binding is not that useful in our day-to-day job, but I'll just show what will happen if you use this syntax. Okay. So I just copied as is. Let me add action name here. action name equals hello world. Okay. So now this action name will be added as area label for this button. You cannot see this button. Oh, I have to save, right? So, yeah. So now I can see the button. If I inspect, so now the area label property is added with the hello world, right? So area label is a property of HTML elements. So this I think will be used for the accessibility. Now I added hello world for this attribute area label, and the value will be added as area label property or attribute for this element. Okay. So it's not much useful in general scenario, but if you want your application to follow the accessibility, so that everyone or disabled persons or everyone can use your application easily. So in those cases, you'll be using the attribute properties or like area label. So any questions so far? I think we finished the data binding in Angular, and if you have any questions, you can ask me now.
No, sir. It's clear.
Okay.